I'm Evelyn Langford, 71 years old, and I never imagined the day would come when my own daughter looked right past me and said someone else would be her real mother. It happened on a Thursday night over dinner. The fork was still halfway to my mouth when she said it. She didn't even glance in my direction. Her eyes were fixed on her plate as she spoke, like I was already gone. Honestly, I wish I had a mother like Lorraine, she said. She's going to be the real grandmother, not just me. I sat there, not moving, not blinking. The room was silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat and the quiet clink of a wine glass before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and tap that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to hold your head high when someone tried to push you aside. I was born in Kansas City and raised by parents who believed in hard work and quiet kindness. We didn't have much. My father ran a hardware store, and my mother baked bread every Saturday for the neighbors who couldn't afford store-bought. My mother used to say, "Dignity isn't about being seen. It's about knowing who you are when no one's looking." I carried that with me when I married Robert. We had one daughter, Paige, and when he passed suddenly in a work accident, I was left to raise her on my own. She was 16, then sharp around the edges, grieving in ways I couldn't always reach. But I never stopped trying. I took extra shifts at the hospital cafeteria, sold our vacation fund so she wouldn't lose her chance at college. Cashed out my retirement savings to help her through that first tough year after her divorce. She didn't see any of that, not really, and maybe that's just how it is sometimes. Maybe children don't notice the hand holding the umbrella until the rain stops. But I noticed. I noticed every time she looked at her mother-in-law with stars in her eyes, Lorraine, who baked cookies and wore matching pajamas with the family at Christmas, who hosted baby showers with tiny pink flags and frosted cupcakes, and smiled sweetly while erasing everything I had done. I didn't say anything that night at dinner when she called Lorraine. The real grandmother. I set my napkin down, folded it neatly on the table, and stood up. No one stopped me. Not my sister, not Paige's husband, not even Paige herself. I walked out of the house. I had poured my life into the house where her baby clothes were still folded on a shelf in the nursery, waiting for a child. I thought I'd rock to sleep. I didn't take a coat or a purse or even a bag. Just walked out into the cool night and kept walking. 2 blocks later, I found myself at the old bus stop bench. Hands clenched so tight they ached, and the only thought in my head was, when did I stop being her mother and start being her servant? I thought maybe she'd call the next morning. Maybe she'd stop by. But nothing came. Not a word. Not even a message. Instead, I walked into the nursery, where I'd hung the green curtains sewn by hand, picked out the softest rocking chair at the thrift store, spent 3 weekends reupholstering it myself. I sat on the edge of the small bed, rested my hand on the pale blue baby hat I had knitted 2 weeks earlier. She never asked for it, but I made it anyway because that's what mothers do. She used to call me practical. Said I never spoiled her like the other moms did. Maybe she was right. I gave her safety instead of sparkle, taught her to budget instead of wish. And now that very steadiness is what she resents. She doesn't remember the nights I cried alone in the laundry room so she wouldn't hear. Doesn't remember the time I wired her money when her rent was due, and she hadn't told me yet. Doesn't remember the casseroles or the handmade dresses or the nights I sat up sewing prom hems because we couldn't afford them all. But I remember. And so does the wall in the hallway with pictures that stopped coming after she married Cole. His mother's a professional photographer, she said once with a shrug, like my iPhone. Snapshots were something to be ashamed of. I didn't know it yet, but that dinner wasn't just a breaking point. It was a beginning, and the version of me that always kept peace. That woman was gone. And the next time I heard Paige speak about me, it would be in a church vestibule with strangers nearby. Her voice cheerful and distant, calling me bitter, difficult, saying I never believed in her dreams. And I would realize that she hadn't just replaced me, she had rewritten me. I hadn't planned to go to church that Sunday. I usually sat near the back same pew every week, but that morning, I slipped in quietly and kept to the shadows by the door. I don't know why. Habit, maybe? Or maybe some part of me still wanted to be near the rhythm of things, the sound of programs rustling, the hum of quiet greetings, the scent of strong coffee and faint perfume from the women's coats. Paige was already there. She stood in the vestibule, chatting with one of the younger women, her hands resting on the round of her stomach like a magazine photo. Her voice carried soft and bright, like everything in her world was smooth and warm. I didn't mean to listen, but I couldn't unhear it once her words reached me. "My mother's always been difficult," she said with a practiced little laugh. Very bitter. She never really supported my dreams, just wanted me to be practical like her. The other woman nodded politely, making the kind of sympathetic face people make when they don't know the whole story but think they've heard enough. Paige kept going. She had her reasons, I guess she said, but I used to beg her to come to my art shows. She always had to work late or said it wouldn't pay the bills. That kind of judgment sticks to you. You start to believe it. I didn't move. I didn't speak, but my teeth sank into the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. I remembered that show. She was 19. Her loan payment was due the next morning, and she wanted me to come see some black and white photos of a friend's apartment floor. I had just come off a double shift and offered to go the next day. She cried. I still sent flowers. That story in her voice had been rewritten into something else entirely. I left before the sermon began, quietly, without a word to anyone. I wasn't angry. I was hollow. That version of me, bitter withholding, ashamed it didn't just hurt. It frightened me, how easily she said it. Tuesday morning, the sun poured into the kitchen like it didn't want to disturb the quiet. I moved slow. Washed my teacup, folded the towel, sorted the mail, like I had somewhere else to be but wasn't in a rush to get there. At 10 o'clock, I stepped into the law office of Bradley and Miles. It was a clean, silent place, too quiet for a building where lives get rewritten. The receptionist handed me a clipboard and smiled. Just the standard updates, Miss Langford. Miss, not Mrs. I hadn't gone by that since Robert passed. I liked it better that way. The attorney, a young man named Darius, offered me coffee, which I declined. He opened a folder and glanced at the forms. You're here about your will? No, I said. I'm here to amend it. He hesitated. Are we removing someone? Yes. Paige Langford, my only child. He looked up from his notepad, waiting. I reached into my purse and handed him a letter, the updated directive I'd written a few nights earlier. I had folded it carefully just once, like I used to fold the notes I tucked into Paige's lunchbox when she was little. Darius read through it in silence. I'd like the inheritance I'd set aside for her to be redirected, I told him. Establish a scholarship fund for single mothers, practical women, the kind who don't have anyone reminding them they matter. He blinked. You don't want to leave anything to family? I sat back in the chair. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who shows up. The documents didn't take long. I signed them all without hesitation. The final one I read twice, then added my initials in the corner like I was sealing something that couldn't be undone. And when it was finished, I walked out of that office lighter than I'd felt in years. The city was buzzing outside, people rushing past with coffee cups and bags of takeout cars honking at lights. I didn't rush. I stepped into a bakery and bought a scone. Raspberry, still warm. I didn't buy it for anyone else, just me. Back at home, I opened the old box I hadn't touched in nearly a decade. It was soft with age corners worn tucked beneath towels and candles in the back of the linen closet. Inside were the letters, stacks of them, all from Robert. He wrote constantly work trips overnights, even when the factory cut shifts and he was only gone a day. Paige always said they were boring. Dad always says the same thing, she used to complain. Take your vitamins, be good to Mom. But I saved every one. The letter from her 3rd birthday. She's spirited like you. Don't worry if she pushes back. She'll thank you one day. The one from the week she broke her arm. I wish I'd been there. I'm glad she had you. She always has you. The college acceptance letter. You were never soft. You were steady. She'll forget the difference until she needs it again. But don't let that harden you. I don't know why that line stayed with me. Maybe because I hadn't realized how much I'd let myself harden. Maybe because it reminded me that someone had seen me fully. The woman who worked late and paid bills without applause. The mother who stood quietly at the center of a life no one thought to thank. That afternoon, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it, but the caller ID said Paige and curiosity got the better of instinct. Hi, Mom, she said, her voice too bright. Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I'm home, I said, but I've got a few things going. Well, she went on trying for casual. We're finally getting the nursery together, and I thought maybe if you had time, you could help me choose some paint colors. You were always good with that sort of thing. I paused, held the phone just far enough from my ear to look at it. I've got other priorities right now. Oh, she said, caught off guard. Like what? I'm working on something personal, I said. And honestly, I'm not available to help decorate. Silence. The kind that sits on the line like a weight. Well, I didn't realize you were so busy, she said, every word laced with sarcasm. I am, I said, and I don't make room anymore for people who only call when they need something. That hit. I could hear it in her breath. That's not fair, Mom. I just thought it'd be nice. For the baby. For us. I didn't raise my voice. Is that what you thought when you called Lorraine the real grandmother? She didn't answer. Did you think of me then, when you said it? When you didn't even look at me? Her voice dropped. I didn't mean it like that, but you said it like that, and you didn't correct yourself. Another long pause. Then finally, I guess I didn't realize you'd taken it so hard. I'm not taking it hard, I said. I'm just not pretending it didn't happen. I let that settle for a beat. I wish you well, Paige. Truly. But I won't shrink myself to fit back into your life on your terms. She let out a breath clipped bitter. So what? You're just done with me now? No. I'm done begging for a role I already earned. Then I did what she never expected. I hung up, and as I set the phone down on the table, hands, steady heart, quiet, I knew it wasn't just a conversation ending. It was a chapter closing. The rumors started the way these things usually do, soft around the edges, passed between errands and hair appointments. Margaret told me first. We were folding auction programs at the church fellowship hall, just the two of us near the coffee urn. She leaned a little closer, her voice low. You might want to know, she said, Linda Fay mentioned something she overheard at the salon. I kept folding, not asking, just waiting. She said Paige has been telling people that you're not well. My hands paused mid-crease. Not well how Margaret's voice stayed low, but her eyes held steady. She said, forgetful, confused, maybe early onset. I blinked once, then again. Margaret added, she told them you left the baby shower planning group because you were having trouble managing things, that you've been isolating, that it might be time someone stepped in. I folded the last program with deliberate care and set it on the stack. She's trying to erase the fallout before anyone starts asking questions. Margaret's expression didn't change, but her hand came to rest gently on mine. She knows people noticed you walked out, that you didn't come back. So now, she's rewriting why. We cleaned up in silence. I stayed a few extra minutes to help reset the chairs, then went home and sat at the dining table staring at nothing in particular. My name was still on the electric bill, still on the deed, still on every casserole dish in the cabinet. But out there in her version of the world, I was fading. Margaret came by the next afternoon. She didn't knock, just walked in the way she always had when Robert was still alive. She set a small leather-bound journal on the kitchen counter. "You need to write it down," she said. "All of it, before they try to tell you what you do and don't remember." It sat untouched for 3 days, not because I didn't believe her, but because I wanted the first words I wrote to be worth writing. When I finally opened it, I started at the beginning. The dinner. Paige's yellow dress. The exact way she said it, Lorraine will be the real grandmother. The way no one looked at me when I stood up. The silence that followed when the door shut behind me. Then the phone call, her voice turning warm and polite when she needed something. My refusal, the way her tone shifted again the moment she heard no. After that, I wrote what Margaret told me. The rumors, the way people were starting to ask questions and being handed a pre-written answer. I wrote it all in clear print, steady lines. Every detail matched with dates, receipts, bank statements. Nothing angry, just true. By the end of the week, I'd compiled a binder 3 inches thick and organized like a tax file. Medical records, my most recent eye exam, a notarized copy of my new will. Letters from the quilting group, Margaret's statement, June Peters' notes from the fundraiser I'd balanced last quarter. Everything Paige was trying to call confusion was recorded here in black and white. I placed it in the fireproof safe under the hall closet. Not because I was afraid, but because I was ready. Then I went to quilting group like nothing had happened. The first person to say anything was June. She leaned in after I passed around the lemon bars. "Evelyn," she said gently, "someone told me you've been acting a little off lately, but you seem fine to me." I didn't flinch. "Paige's shame doesn't match her story," I said quietly. "So she's calling it a decline." June didn't argue. She just nodded and passed me the red thread spool. By the time we gathered again the next week, I was ready. I brought the binder with me. Not to prove anything, just to be visible. I didn't wave it around. I didn't announce it. I just set it on the table beside my sewing basket and began threading my needle. Margaret glanced at it, then at me. "You sure?" she asked. "I want people to see I'm not hiding." One by one, the women noticed. Quiet murmurs, curious glances. Then June reached across the table and flipped open the binder. "What is this?" she asked. "Clarity," I said. "Everything Paige said I forgot. Everything she claimed I can't manage. My calendar, my accounts, signed statements, letters, records, the truth." She turned the pages slowly. I kept sewing. "She's trying to erase you," June said after a few minutes. I nodded. "But I know who I am." Beth leaned in. "You brought Judy a meal when she had surgery last month and stayed to do her dishes." Gretchen added, "You ran all the numbers for the fall fundraiser, balanced it down to the penny." Lorraine D., who rarely spoke, whispered, "You taught me how to sew a zipper." That wasn't even part of the class. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. One by one they spoke. Not like they were taking my side, but like they were remembering it. The version of me that had always been there, beneath the noise. After the meeting, June stopped me at the coffee table. If anyone repeats those rumors, she said they'll have to say them in front of us. I didn't cry. I just nodded. That night, I returned home and placed the binder back in the safe. Not out of fear, out of completion. It had done what it needed to do. I stood in my living room and looked around. Nothing had changed, but everything had shifted. I didn't need to defend my past anymore. I just needed to live my present fully and visibly. And the next time Paige tried to make herself the only voice in the room, I wouldn't be silent. The morning after quilting group, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after the storm's passed, but the sky hasn't cleared yet. I stared at the old yellow notepad I kept near the bread box. I didn't even remember pulling it out. At the top of the page, I wrote a single sentence, applied to volunteer at the library. It looked small, almost nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I folded the paper once, set it aside, and got up to rinse my mug. From that point forward, I told myself my time would only go where it was seen. No more explaining, no more asking to be understood. The invitation came 2 days later. A soft blue card dropped off by Cole himself. I didn't invite him in. He stayed on the porch, holding the envelope like it had weight to it. My mother thought it might be good if you and she had tea, he said, his voice a little too smooth. Thought maybe we could ease some of the tension for the baby's sake. I didn't answer right away, just nodded once, and he left without pressing. I thought about declining. It wasn't hard to guess who'd sent him, but something told me to go, not for her, not for Paige, but for myself. I wore the same knit sweater Paige once said made me look like a church pew. I wore it anyway. It was warm, and it never pretended to be something it wasn't. Lorraine's house smelled like potpourri and new carpet. Her kitchen was spotless. Not lived-in spotless, staged spotless. She poured tea that steeped too long and served cookies still in their plastic tray. Everything about the room was soft-edged and pastel, even her voice. I just hate seeing families grow distant, she said, smiling. I know Paige can be a little passionate, but she means well. She just wants to feel supported. I didn't respond. I watched the steam rise from my cup. She told me about the misunderstanding, she continued. I thought maybe for the baby we could come together. There's always room for more than one grandmother, right? I set the cup down gently. You already took the role, I said. You don't need me. Her smile faltered, just a little unsure where to go next. I'm not angry, I added. I'm just clear. There's a difference. She folded her hands. Surely there's room for grace. There's room for a lot of things, I said, but not if respect isn't one of them. I stood, buttoned my coat, and looked her in the eye. You've earned her adoration. Enjoy your title. Then I left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry in the car. I just went home and reheated the tea I never finished. That night, Margaret called and told me she'd signed me up to speak at the library. Don't say no, she added. You've got something to say, and I think it's time people heard it. I said I'd think about it, but I already knew I would go. It was a small gathering, just a circle of folding chairs in the community room. Most of the women were older, some retired, some still figuring out what came next. I stood near the front, holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm. I wasn't always alone. I started, but I've often felt invisible. A few heads nodded. I kept going. I raised a daughter who no longer sees me as part of her success. Just the silence she grew out of. That line landed. I could see it in the way one woman blinked a little too fast, in the way another folded her arms tight across her chest. I made dinners when there was nothing in the fridge but eggs and flour. I sewed her prom dress at the kitchen table because we couldn't afford the boutique. I drove to interviews with coins from the glove compartment and kept the lights on when no one else knew they were close to going out. I paused, then said, "And even after all that, I was replaced." A woman across from me wiped a tear. She tells people I never supported her dreams. But belief doesn't always sound like cheerleading. Sometimes it sounds like, take the night shift if it gets your foot in the door. Sometimes it sounds like, we can't afford art school, but I'll drive you to every gallery in the county until someone remembers your name. The room didn't respond with applause or gasps. It just got still. The kind of stillness that feels like someone holding something precious in their hands. "I used to think I had to explain myself," I said, "to justify how I loved her. But I don't need permission to be proud of surviving." When it was over, a few women came up and hugged me. Some didn't say a word, just squeezed my hand and nodded. That night, I stood in front of the hallway mirror and looked at myself. Not as Paige's mother, not as someone who had failed or fallen short. Just as a woman who had kept going one step at a time, even when no one saw her feet moving. I didn't go to Paige's baby shower. I'd known about it for weeks, saw the pictures online. Soft pink streamers, a 3-tier cake, a registry full of pastel things I'd once dreamed of buying. Things I had already bought quietly months before she cut me out. Instead, I lit a candle on the dining table and sat down with a pen. "Dear Paige," I began. "This isn't a letter of bitterness. It's a letter of truth." I wrote without stopping, each word like a stone I was finally setting down. I didn't accuse. I didn't defend. I just told the truth. When I sealed the envelope, I tucked in photos, ones she hadn't asked for in years. Her on the day of her first recital. Her asleep in my lap the night her fever spiked. Me holding her diploma while she looked the other way. I mailed it that afternoon. No return address. No note inside asking her to call. She would know who it came from, and she would understand exactly what it meant. Because from that moment on, everything I did next would be for me. 3 days after the baby shower, I opened the cedar chest in my bedroom. It had sat at the foot of my bed for years, holding the things I thought would one day be hers. My mother's locket, the silver tea set from our wedding, the quilt stitched by my great-grandmother. Paige had always assumed they'd be passed down to her, spoken with ease about handing them to her daughter someday. She never asked. She just expected. I took each piece out slowly, laid them on the bed, not to admire, not to second-guess, just to let the light hit them one last time. Then I called a private buyer who dealt in heirlooms. He arrived that same afternoon, wore gloves, spoke softly, and treated each item like something sacred. He didn't haggle. I didn't either. I signed the release forms and handed them over one by one. It didn't feel like a loss. It felt like closing a book I had carried too long. After he left, I logged into my bank account and closed the last joint savings account Paige's name was tied to. She had never added a dollar to it, but still referred to it like it was part of her safety net. I removed her name from the emergency contact on my medical forms. Then I blocked her number. I didn't do it in anger. I did it because peace has its own sound, and I was finally learning what it felt like. The next morning, I changed the locks. Not because she had a key, but because I didn't want to keep wondering if she ever thought to come back through that door like nothing had happened. I moved through the house like I was clearing smoke from a room. Opened every window, dusted shelves I hadn't touched in years. Then I packed up the nursery. Not with ceremony, not with sorrow, just with care. I folded the tiny clothes, boxed the books, set aside the hand-knit blankets and soft toys I'd cleaned and stored. These weren't going to waste. They were going to start somewhere else. At noon, I drove across town and walked into the women's shelter with the box in my arms. The intake coordinator, a young woman maybe in her 20s, looked surprised. "It's all handmade," I said. "Everything's clean. Labeled. Ready." She reached out slowly like the box held more than cloth and cotton. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I didn't leave my name. I didn't need it attached to anything." By the time I got home, the house felt different, lighter, clearer. I made myself a sandwich and sat at the dining table, the same table where everything had changed. Paige's chair was still there. I didn't move it. I just let it be empty. That afternoon, I took one final step. I logged into the cloud photo account, the one I'd been paying for every month so Paige could store her digital albums. I downloaded every picture that still mattered her as a baby with chocolate on her cheeks, Robert holding her in the hospital room, me wearing my old wedding dress to her graduation, because I couldn't afford anything new. Then, I deleted the rest. Not out of bitterness, just to unchain myself from the version of her that forgot who held her when the world didn't. When I finished, I sat back in the chair and let the stillness settle. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel victory. Just quiet. Later that day, her car pulled into the driveway. I recognized the sound of the door slamming before I saw her face. She didn't knock, just marched up and started speaking the moment I opened the door. "You blocked me," she snapped, holding out the letter I'd written. "Are you serious right now, Mom?" I didn't step aside. She waved the envelope like it was evidence, selling the heirlooms, changing your will. "What is wrong with you?" Her voice echoed down the street. A jogger paused across the road. Somewhere behind us, a wind chime moved in the breeze. I didn't answer. I turned back into the hallway, picked up a second envelope from the entry table, and handed it to her. "What's this?" she demanded. "Read it when you're alone," I said. "You won't find me waiting here again." Her face twisted in confusion, then anger. "What's that supposed to mean?" But I didn't explain. I didn't soften. I walked around her down the front path, got in my car, and drove away. She wasn't there to reconnect. She was there to reclaim. But there was nothing left for her to take. I didn't look back. The next morning, Margaret called. She canceled the brunch she was planning, she said. Told Lorraine she wasn't feeling well. I said nothing. She got the second letter, didn't she? I'm sure of it. That letter didn't have blame in it. It had facts. Photos with dates, medical forms, school fees, donation slips. It had pages of moments she told others didn't exist. And at the end, it had my handwriting. "You wanted a mother who spoiled you. I chose to prepare you for a world that wouldn't. You wanted fairy tales. I gave you shelter, clean sheets, and food on the table. You say I never gave you anything. But you are standing here because I gave you everything I had. I signed it your mother, but no longer your caretaker." Margaret was quiet on the phone. "Do you think she'll come around?" I looked out at the garden. The peonies were just starting to fade, their petals soft and scattered across the soil. "I don't know," I said. And I'm all right not knowing. Because for the first time in my life, I had finally given something back to myself. The first call came from Aunt Leah. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 2 years. She left a voicemail that started with a long pause and ended with, "I just heard some things about the scholarship, about what happened. I didn't know. I hope you're doing okay." Then cousin Denise reached out. Then Margaret's sister. Then my late husband's cousin in Idaho, who hadn't called since Robert's funeral. They came like water through a crack in the stone quiet, cautious as if they weren't sure what kind of welcome they'd find. Their voices held something I recognized right away. not concern. Guilt. They'd heard Paige's version first. Too rigid. Emotionally distant. Not herself lately. And they believed it. Believed it because it was easier. Quieter. Now they were circling back, testing the air. I should have checked in sooner. We'd love to catch up. Let us know if you need anything. I said the same thing each time. I'm doing just fine. I didn't explain. I didn't ask why it took this long. I didn't offer details. I wasn't holding a grudge, but I wasn't holding the door wide open either. That part of me, eager, hopeful, always trying to stay in the picture, that part was gone. Margaret came by with a casserole and a look that said she had news she couldn't wait to share. She didn't even sit down before she said it. I heard from June, she said, setting the dish on the counter. Apparently, Cole's been asking questions. I looked up from where I was sorting the mail. What kind of questions? About you. About the will. The scholarship. She paused, then added. He saw the press release. The one announcing the fund in your name. I didn't say anything. He told someone Evelyn was always more generous than people gave her credit for. I opened the cabinet, took down 2 plates, and set them on the table. Margaret leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Men like that think they can do damage control. Spin the story back in their favor. But this isn't PR. This is Paige's reflection cracking. I didn't argue. I didn't nod either. Some things speak loudest in the silence. Later that week, an envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address, but I didn't need one. Inside was a note handwritten. The tone was soft, careful. Not quite an apology, just a suggestion that maybe we could all put the past behind us. That it might be nice to see each other again. There was a gathering coming up, a small family thing. No pressure, the message said. Just a chance to reconnect. Paige would be there. We just miss you, it ended. I read it twice, folded it once, set it aside. The next morning I wrote a response. I wish you well, I said. But I won't place myself in rooms that forgot me when it mattered. I sealed it, dropped it in the outgoing box. No extras, no smiley face, no maybe next time. There wasn't going to be a next time. Not like that. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was clean. It didn't ache. It didn't cling. It felt like a closed door in a quiet room where the sun still came in. That Saturday, I drove to the shops and bought myself a pair of pearl earrings. Not flashy, not expensive, just simple, elegant, and mine. I wore them to Sunday service. Wore my navy dress, the one with the neat collar, and the hem that falls just below the knee. I sat in my usual pew near the back. Watched the way I always did, people filing in coats, getting folded bulletins tucked into purses. June leaned over as the choir began to sing. She looked at me, then smiled. You look like someone who doesn't carry dead weight anymore. I didn't answer right away, just nodded once and let her words sit in the space between us. Because she was right. I wasn't carrying Paige's expectations. I wasn't carrying the family's silence. I wasn't carrying the years I spent trying to be seen. I was carrying only what mattered now. And the time was coming when even Paige, especially Paige, would feel the weight of everything I had set down. And everything I'd picked up in its place. I was in the kitchen, finishing up the dishes, when Margaret called again. Her voice was quieter this time. She's been keeping to herself, she said. Didn't show up for church. Skipped her shift at the center. Nobody's seen her in a week. I didn't say anything right away. I dried my hands on a dish towel and looked out the window toward the garden. The peonies were nearly gone now, their petals soft and scattered like paper across the soil. I think she's sitting with it, I said after a moment. That letter, Margaret asked. all of it. We didn't speak much after that. She just said she was making soup and would drop some off later, and I thanked her like I always do. But something about the way she said it stuck with me. I could feel it too. That stillness in the air. The kind that settles after something breaks. The days that followed were quiet. No new calls. No new letters. Just silence. But not the kind that carries absence. The kind that waits. I spent one morning in the sunroom, sorting through papers I hadn't touched in years. Old receipts, donation slips, letters from the Scholarship Foundation, thank you notes from 2 of the first recipients. One line stood out in particular. Your gift reminded me that someone out there believes in women like me. I folded it neatly and placed it in the file with the others. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the center. I'd promised to help reorganize the reading room and hadn't yet had the heart to start. The space still smelled like old carpet and vanilla candles. I spent 2 hours moving shelves, rearranging chairs, wiping down every surface until my arms ached. When I was done, I stood in the doorway and looked at the room clean, bright, and open. No one would know what had been there before, just like I wanted. On my way out, I stopped by the donation box in the lobby. Someone had left a stack of folded baby clothes, soft yellows and greens, all neatly pressed. A card tucked between the folds read, "For another beginning." No signature. The next day I received a message from one of the board members of the scholarship committee. A young woman named Elise. Her email was short. We've received another round of applications. One in particular stood out. She mentioned your name, said your story gave her courage to apply. I read it 3 times, then closed the laptop. That evening, I sat at the table with my planner and wrote down 3 things I wanted to do in the next month. None of them involved Paige. None of them involved looking back. I didn't expect what came next. It was a knock. Not the sharp, hurried kind, but soft, hesitant. I opened the door to find Lorraine standing on my porch. Her coat pulled tight around her shoulders, a small paper bag in her hands. She smiled, but her eyes were tired. I'm not here to fix anything, she said. Just to deliver something. She held out the bag. Inside was a small envelope. No note, just a flash drive and a folded piece of paper. She asked me to bring it, Lorraine said. Didn't want to come herself. Not yet. I nodded. Took the bag, thanked her, and stepped back inside. I didn't rush to open it. Instead, I made tea. Set the envelope on the table. Let it sit there while the kettle boiled. When I finally unfolded the note, I read the first line out loud. If I raised you, be better to me than you were to her. It was the line I had written at the bottom of my letter, the one Paige never responded to. Beneath it, she had written just 3 words. I remember now. I sat for a long time, the paper still in my hand. Then I plugged in the flash drive. It was a video, just her, sitting on the edge of her couch, the nursery behind her. No makeup, hair pulled back, her voice low. I don't expect anything from this, she said. But I needed you to know. I read everything. I saw the dates, the photos, the proof. I've spent the last few weeks trying to make sense of why I forgot all of it. Why I told the story like you were the villain. She looked down. Took a breath. I think I needed you to be the reason I didn't turn out perfect. It was easier to blame you than admit I took your strength for granted. I didn't cry. I just listened. I know you don't owe me anything, and I know you've already given more than I deserved, but I wanted to try, even if you never watch this. When it ended, the screen went black. I sat still. The house didn't feel smaller. It didn't feel bigger either. Just quiet. I didn't respond. Not yet. Maybe not at all. But something had changed. Because now she had said it. Not in a phone call, not in a public apology. Just quietly, directly. Like the silence between us had shifted. I placed the flash drive in the drawer beside the binder, tucked the note inside the folder of scholarship letters, closed it without fanfare. Whatever came next wasn't mine to chase, but I would be ready if it came with respect. I waited a full week before I made the appointment, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to be sure, really sure, that I wasn't doing it out of anger or grief or some need to prove a point. I wanted to do it from a place of clarity, from a place of peace. The notary came to the house on a Thursday morning. She was kind, efficient, didn't ask questions, didn't comment on the signatures or the dates. Just went through the steps one by one until every line was signed, witnessed, sealed. When she left, I stood there for a moment, holding the envelope in my hand. Then I tucked it into the lockbox where the old will used to be. I had changed everything. The trust was no longer tied to family by blood. It was tied to family by choice. The scholarship fund was no longer split between legacy and merit. It would now go entirely to women who had been written off, pushed aside, or told they'd failed too many times to begin again. And the house, this house I'd poured decades into, would go to the foundation when I passed. To be turned into a community retreat, a place of healing, of safety. That same day, I mailed a letter, not to Paige, but to Lorraine. A short note, just 3 lines. I updated the trust. I want you to know how much your steadiness has meant to me. Thank you for choosing to stay close, even when it would have been easier to walk away. I didn't expect anything in return. But a week later, a small card arrived. Inside, in Lorraine's careful script, were the words, "Some things can't be fixed, but they can be faced." And you did. I keep that card in the kitchen drawer now, right next to the recipe book Henry's mother gave us the year we got married. It's the drawer I open the most. As for Paige, I haven't heard from her again. No letters, no emails, no second video. But last I heard, she was attending a support group for new mothers, working with a therapist, helping out with a local art class. I don't know what any of that means for our future, and I don't need to. For the first time in a long while, I'm not living with an empty seat at the table, I'm just living. Because closure doesn't always come wrapped in an apology. Sometimes it comes in the quiet act of choosing who you'll be, even if the world never acknowledges what you carried. I chose peace. I chose to build something lasting, even when everything around me was breaking. I chose to stay kind, not because it was easy, but because it was right. And I'm still here, still standing, still holding on to the truth that dignity doesn't have to shout to be heard. If this story found you at the right time, I hope you'll take a moment to reflect, maybe share it with someone who needs it. And if it reminded you of your own strength, I'd be honored if you'd stay a while. There's always room at the table.